Beat detective. Really simply, beat detective is, and this is in chapter 9, it's a tool inside of Pro Tools that allows you to all at one time chop up or basically quantize audio that's rhythmic, that's transient, things like drums, claps, tambourine, anything that's essentially rhythmic and transient. It will sync it to the grid, but it'll sync it to the type of grid you build for it. So essentially what happens is you'll have moments that you'll find in Beat Detective, and we'll look at these, where when we look at the bar and beat grid, you'll find instances where the waveform is ahead of the bar. You'll find instances where the waveform is behind the bar. What Beat Detective does is it detects essentially where these transients are, and then of course, because it thinks it knows, and we define it based upon parameters, and I'll show you what they are. We tell it what to use, 16th note, 8th note, all that fun stuff. And it, instead of just quantizing it, the really hard part about quantizing drums is that if you quantize it, you have to manually chop all of them up into individual regions. And that's painful, especially if the pattern is like, let's just say the kick pattern is boom, boom, boom. And that was just one measure out of, you know, whatever, 400, 500 something measures in a song. That was just one measure. Does that make sense? So if that was 3 kicks per measure, you multiply that, I mean, even multiply that times 100, it's only 100 measures. That's 300 regions you have to go through to splice manually in order to quantize it. Does that make sense? So what Beat Detective does is it does that on its own, and it'll say, here are the transient points I find. It'll slice them up, or what we'll see as separate. And there are certain functions in how they work. And as soon as it separates them, it'll conform those regions to the bar. The problem with it is, or the complication is, not all the regions conform in the same way. So notice this region conforms backwards because the bar's behind it. This region will conform forward because the bar's in front of it. So with this, what we're going to see is we actually do have to, we will have to analyze. So it will analyze, then we will separate, and then we will conform, and then the big really blessing of this whole thing. Imagine if you had to chop these up into little pieces, right? And then you conform them to the grid. Now what do you do about crossfading all of them, right? Especially if, I think this one's maybe 10 tracks, 10 individual tracks of the drum set, so 10 mics on one drum kit. So each one of those would have to be crossfaded. Well, what this does is it does a fill, which by fill, it doesn't just fill random stuff, it fills it with the content that was originally there before it cut it up. And it meets these regions, so when it chops this and it moves it over, you know, and basically it puts it right on the bar, it then says, oh, okay, well this one got chopped and it got moved over here, and then it fills the gap between them, essentially just like a trim tool would. It grabs it, essentially a trim tool, pulls it back so that these two connect in the middle, and then it applies a crossfade. So fill plus fade. All essentially to come down to sounding like the drummer was spot on. Is basically what it resolves to. And that's the real reason for this is you'll find that you know, a lot of times it's just a little loose to the click. A lot of times it could just be tighter, and if it was tighter, oh man, all of a sudden you'd hear it start to pop. Does that make sense? So I'm just going to go through these. Obviously we only have so much time, and I'm just going to run you down. Now, here's the trick. I'm going to tell you a trick, okay? Beat Detective, and I'll open it and show it to you here. Now, while I'm discussing, just listen to me while I'm opening this, and I'll talk about the trick. The trick is this. I've done a lot of work with drums. What you have to understand about drums is there are several mics across the kit, right? Kick mic, snare mic, hat mic, tom mic, ride mics, overheads, room mics, the whole gambit. The problem with them is that the kick mic, okay, for instance, the kick mic kicks its kick at a certain time. And the room mics and the overheads pick up the kick. And a lot of times they are mixed down with the kick in those mics without gaining, without getting rid of it, because the room mics essentially pick up the room sound of the entire kit. Well, what's the delay from the kick to the room mic? And that's where we have to get picky about who we choose out of the kit to mark time, right? And who we choose out of the kit essentially to also to manipulate and how. In my younger days, I used to do beat detective through and through on every track independently. And they have that, they have what's called collection mode, where you can collect all the slices and you can build off them. The problem is that if you move all of them independently, then sometimes the kick gets moved independently when the room does not, and that delay time goes away. So all of a sudden, the kick and the room are at the same time. Problem with that is it takes away from the idea of a room mic. You see what I'm saying? Because there's no delay. We kind of want the delay. We need the delay to embody a sense of kind of fullness by just being distant. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. By tightening them up so far that they both go together at the same instance of time, it takes all that away. Well, and at some instances it'll line that up because the kick is matching the room kick to the kick kick, and then it's going to try to match the room hat to the hat to the hat mic. But if the kick's under there somewhere, then, and if they ever at any instance hit at the same time, then it has to choose, oh, who do I match? Kick or hat? See what I'm saying? And it becomes this thing where it starts to weave all 8, 10, 12 tracks of the drums to where they don't look or sound like they did before, where they were full, they were in time with each other. Now they're in time with the grid perfectly, but they're not in time with each other. Does that make sense? So there's moments where it's like, oh, it feels great, oh, it feels weird, oh, you know what I mean? And it's just so choppy. So what I've learned to do, and the best way to really approach this, is let's pick one target, and let's make that one target the target for all. Because it'll mark time relative to where everybody else sits. So if, a great example, I kind of bounce back and forth a little bit. Overheads are usually a great target because of this one factor. Overheads will have a delay, okay, from the kick to the snare, right? Essentially from the kick to the snare to the hat to everything else. But what overheads will do is they'll relatively match time with everybody conformly, in a uniform manner. And then what you can do is if that delay shows on the grid as being behind the grid at all, you just take the whole thing after it's resolved to itself, after it's relatively in time with itself, because they'll all be matched just behind the grid on that delay, whatever that delay amount is, just enough, and you just shift all of them forward that much. Does that make sense? So they stay in time with each other, because the overheads, the room is a little distant, usually. The overhead's usually the only person that has a good grasp balance on everybody. Does that make sense? And so we'll take the overhead time, and that overhead time will have ride, it'll have hat, it'll have all that fun stuff. And then what it'll do is it will be the marker, and it will begin to say, this is this particular moment in time. In this, though, there is a trigger pad, and I'll show you how to set it. The trigger pad says there is basically a front end to how much. You guys know ADSR, right? ADSR stands for what? Attack, decay, sustain, release, right? The attack. The trigger pad is that front end to make sure we capture the beginning of the attack, not just at the hot part. Does that make sense? That trigger pad will move forward of where the selection marker begins to pick itself after it analyzes, and it'll say, let's give it a little grace room on the front end. Does that make sense? So that we make sure we hear the beginning of every attack. Does that make sense? And what that'll essentially do is it'll give us that room that we need
really make it sound like it pops in the front. And of course compensate for a little bit of delay. So let's do it. Follow me here. Go to, well actually, do this before we do tons of stuff. Hold Option and click a nameplate. Any one nameplate, period. You got it? All right, now hold Shift Option and go to the ruler. Make everybody medium. They'll be nice and easy to look at this way. Oh, that's fine. All right, the only people we're going to worry about are not all this loop and NYC kit and all that stuff. We're going to focus on everything that's from kick down to overhead right. And we're basically going to tighten up these sections so that they are tightened up to things like the acoustic and the loop. So you can hear the kit. All right, now here's what we're going to do. We're going to go to Event, Beat Detective. Now, there are a couple catches about Beat Detective, and I'm going to run you through them. Easiest way to do Beat Detective so you never screw up and it makes life really easy is to go to your grid resolution and change it to bar. So up in your normal grid resolution section, change it to bar. Let me know when everybody's in bar. Ready? Okay, now here's what I want you to do. I want you to go to towards the beginning where the whole rhythm starts. Let's go ahead and skip this part right here. Let's start at bar 35. You see bar 35? When you're at bar 35, go ahead and pull down until you get down to the overhead right. So you're highlighting all these drum tracks from kick to overhead right on bar 35. Select from kick to overhead right. So all of them, all the drum tracks are selected at bar 35. Just the cursor's blinking on bar 35 for now.
I don't know. I don't see bar 35 anymore. I see bar 33.
Just type in bar 35.
Yeah, if you type in start and just type in bar 35. Did it do it?
So from kick to where?
Down to overhead right. All right, now hold Shift, Option, hold Shift, hold Option, and hit Return. Now this is the opposite of the function that I mentioned earlier, Shift, Option, Return. Where normally when we hold Shift, Return, it selects from where we are to the beginning. This will select from where we are to the end. Shift, Option, Return. Yep. Well, Shift Option Return will just do it for you. Just try it real quick. Just hit Shift Option Return.
Oh yeah, you need to do it for all of them. So what you can do is hold Shift, and then just click all of them, go all the way down to, yep, just like that. And you end at overhead right.
Now we're going to make an adjustment, okay? Go all the way to the end. I want this last part to end right on a bar downbeat. Any bar, the farthest bar downbeat to the right that you can find, like say, what is this?
bar 343, beat 1. Hold shift, select it. And hit Command E.
Bar 3.
343, beat 1. So slide all the way to the right, bar 343, beat 1. Hold shift and click on that bar, and then hit Command E. Now, the part that you just got rid of, at the end, highlight it, press delete. Well, you can actually, should let you.
I think you should have went a little earlier, right? Because one of them is.
Hit Command E.
Oh no, you won't have to worry about the AC left or right, the acoustic guitar. The reason we need to go as far back as we can is because where you're not seeing is the cymbals are still going.
Okay, so now that I got this, I just hit delete.
Yep. You already deleted that section, right? Oh no, oh I'm sorry, you didn't shift. If you hit shift, it would have done it, it would have, here, let's do this, right here. Oh, there you go, okay, hit Command E, and then grab just these and hit delete. The reason we have to section this off is because it's real, beat detective gets quirky, and if it doesn't start at a bar downbeat and end at a bar downbeat, it really gets confused, and it starts to move things off the beat. So this will make life real easy. Another part that you'll see is as soon as we set up the parameters, you'll literally be able to go boom, 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 next track, boom, 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 next track, boom, 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 next track. Real easy. So let me show this to you. I'm going to go ahead and highlight overhead right just for now, and that's going to be my starting marker, okay? Oh, whoops. Sorry, let me catch up to you. So what you're going to do is start towards the beginning. All you're going to do is select overhead right and just the section that we just created. And all you have to do is double click the region, it'll select the whole thing. But try to slide towards the front. Go towards the front so you can see where it begins. So do you guys see how I've done this so far?
Yeah.
So I've only selected overhead right, and the reason we section these is so you can just double click in each region and it'll be the exact same amount of time.
Okay. Now, I'm just double clicking.
Yep. With Beat Detective open.
Beat detective is open.
Do you already have Beat Detective open? Yeah? No, you're not gonna. You don't need to double click them all. Just double click on overhead right. I was just showing you that this will allow me to go quickly through them.
I don't see my parameters.
You don't see what? How are we looking? Everybody okay? You okay? Yeah.
I don't have that. I don't have one.
Your Beat Detective?
I got my beat detective, but I don't have the parameters that I said when I double click it. Clicks on the whole track. From the very beginning.
Oh, did you hit Command E, right? Oh, you know what? It's because when you did that selection, you went all the way to the front. All right, here's what you're going to do.
I'm just going to go down.
Go.
35, hit shift.
Yeah, bar 35.
Okay.
Go to bar 35 and select all of them. All you have to do is don't make like a wide selection. Just drop the cursor at 35.
Yeah.
And then hit Command E. It'll separate it at that juncture. Does that make sense?
Yeah. There's 35 right there. Oh, shit.
Now, the really fantastic part about this is you see in Beat Detective where it says bar beat marker generation and groove template extraction.
Yeah.
On the left under operation.
Yeah.
What the first one is if you had a drummer that didn't play to a click and he was really loose, but you wanted everybody to be synced to his grid, what this would do is you would be able to, where it says generate, it will generate a tempo map so that every time he hits his downbeat, it's the downbeat of the tempo. And it'll adjust the click. Every time that he changes tempo, the click will go with it. which means that if you want to have a band follow it after that, and it will set up the grid so that it's exactly to whatever the drummer did. Kind of nice for older music, especially like, because a lot of music, like especially from the 80s and stuff like that, gets redone or remixed. Stuff that did not get Pro Tools back in the day, where they can kind of use some of the grid features from it to modify or reconstruct some things in the edit window. The groove template extraction, which is the second thing, gives you the ability to make a loop. And if you had a loop and you had the drummer play the same pattern and the loop was accurate but the drummer was not, you could do the groove template extraction, highlight the loop, extract the loop groove, and use it as a map to make the all the rhythms in the drummer's pattern sync to what the groove did. That's another way to go about this. Most people don't do it that way though, because it means you had to actually create a groove loop that was a lot like the original, the way that the drummer performed it, which is usually not the case. We will start by highlighting overhead right and go to region separation. You got it?
Yeah.
All right, now I'm going to show you this, and the steps are going to be identical. Watch as this works out, okay? I'm going to switch, or I'm sorry, capture selection first. Hit that button. See where it says capture selection? Boom. It's going to mark your start bar 35.1 and your last bar 343.1. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Then you're going to change that quarter note. We're going to change this to eighth note. And just hope that he doesn't play anything smaller than an eighth note. He might. We'll find out in like 2 seconds here. Now, here's what's going to happen. In region separation, our main steps are we're going to separate, then we're going to conform to the grid, and then we're going to edit smooth by filling and crossfading. In order to separate, we have to go over here and hit Analyze. So hit Analyze on the detection side, and then move your sensitivity bar to 100%. What you'll see is it's going to go in and subdivide every little beat pattern inside of this that it finds as a transient, and those are where the separations are going to take place. I would like for you to create a 3 millisecond trigger time. So, or see where it says trigger pad, type in 3, hit return. So far so good? All right, I'm going to zoom in so you can see what happens to mine. You can keep yours zoomed out because you might want to watch yours as a whole. I'm going to zoom in so you can see it, the movement. I'm going to go ahead and hit separate. And this will be the same thing for all these other tracks as you go through them. You won't have to redo the capture, and you won't have to redo analyze. And please don't redo the analyzation or the sensitivity, because the overhead right is going to be our marker for all. So what this decides are the patterns that it's picking up will be the patterns that we use across the board. So we're going to hit separate. It's going to make individual regions. Go ahead and hit separate real quick. All right, then on the left in operation, go to region conform. And this is where you get to add some swing if you did want it to swing, or an ability to make some sort of difference of strength so it doesn't conform straight to the grid. But a lot of times you want it fairly tight to the grid. So all we're going to do here is skip this standard, leave it in standard mode. We're going to hit conform, and it's going to shift to the grid. Then all we have to do as soon as you hit conform, did everybody hit conform? We're going to go to edit, smoothing. And see where it says fill gaps? Go to the second, fill gaps and crossfade. Leave it at the default 5 milliseconds. It's essentially going to fill the gap and add a crossfade everywhere you see a gap here. Hit smooth. It's going to take a little bit to go through this. But what we should be seeing is we should be seeing that now we see some of these did get moved. And, okay, here's a great example. See how far ahead of the beat this beat is right here? There's the grid. There's the beat. This slid it back to where it belongs, essentially. And it slid this one to where this one belongs, and so on and so forth. So if we keep scrolling through these, we'll see more instances where you'll begin to see some are ahead, some are behind, some are, you know, in between. All of them essentially got conformed so that they match the grid. And then, of course, it's going to just take a while because it's doing the film. It's got to do all the crossfades. What we're going to do is immediately after this first one's done, all you're going to do is highlight the next one. So, and we'll go upwards till we get to kick. Highlight overhead left, just the same exact thing, the same exact region essentially, but the overhead left one. You'll go to region separate. All you'll do now is really easy and fluid. You won't have to do any of this stuff anymore because we're using the same cues that overhead right did. Go to region separate, hit separate. Go to region conform, hit conform. Go to edit smoothing and hit smooth. And wait for it to cycle through. Once it's done, go to the next one. Do each of those 3 steps. Really simple. When it's done, you'll push play and it'll essentially be locked to the grid. Try to hustle though, we only have 6 minutes. Obviously you don't have to get through this if we don't have time, but essentially this is how this works.
Now, do I have to wait for like Tom 2 to finish before I can move on to the next one?
Yep. Yeah, unfortunately, because if you jump to the next one and you start a new command, it's going to not finish the, unfortunately, the first. Now, I'll tell you this. This does give you the ability to do all of these tracks at one time if we highlight them all. The problem with it is it has a lot of errors. It generates a lot of errors to the point where you're like, oh, I got to go back and redo it, pretty much the whole thing. Essentially, the reason, all it has to do is error maybe once or twice, and what it'll do is if it misses a conforming one person, or if what it tends to do is it tends to accidentally delete something, and then what should have been on bar 1, because we lost a beat, gets shifted to beat 3. Or I should say beat 1 gets shifted to beat 3 because something got lost. And then it goes it'll triculate all the way down to the end of the song where before you know it, you're like, wow, there's a whole 2 beats missing and I don't know where we lost them. Now we got to go all the way back and figure out what happened. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And it's just a little too erroneous to just do in one shot. And even more so because sometimes the patterns are very different. Like maybe you have a syncopated pattern in the chorus, but a straight pattern at the verse. A lot of times I like to do them in chunks. So I'll do just the verse, then I'll do just the chorus. So I make sure that, you know, I attack them in two different portions so that if they're dramatically different rhythms, they don't get conformed a lot like each other and then essentially have errors in them. Sometimes you end up also conforming individual fills if you need to have it at 8th note in order to make the rest of the beat sound awesome, but there's a fill that's in the 16th note category, so you might have to highlight just that fill and just do that, just one section in 16th note form. A lot of variations, but essentially overall, and I know because I've done it and I still do it sometimes, just to make sure that it gets done correctly, way faster than manually correcting every beat and having to copy paste, copy paste, copy paste. All right, because you know, obviously due to time, we're not going to get all the way through it. If you guys want to go ahead and save where you are, and you can just shut it down. I could just show you mine as you're packing up. I'll just show you what mine ended up coming out like.